Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Oh boy, this is going to be a name. So this is a request, and it's from Slave to Rulers of Central Asia documentary. I'll repeat it again if you'd like me to. Just a second. From Slave to Rulers of Central Asia. It's inappropriate for me to eat while I'm doing this. And let's get on with the video.
Stories of individuals who went from rags to riches throughout history and in our current age are some of the most inspiring and enthralling tales we know. The lower the status of the eventually triumphant figure, the more exciting the tale, and there is no status in the medieval world lower than that of a slave. In this video, we will examine the origins of the Ghaznavid Empire and the life of its progenitor, a slave who created a massive empire that broke into India and fully exposed it to Islamic conquerors for the first time. And now a few words about the sponsor of
Sorry, it's glitching, so let's see if it's
about the sponsor of this video, Raid Shadow Legends. 7.5 billion humans might play Raid Shadow Legends, and 25 million already do, so let us tell you why you should join them. Free champion, Executioner.
The guy who narrates these videos, I want to pay him to just walk around and narrate my life.
The Abbasid Caliphate began to weaken as a centralized political entity from the mid-9th century onwards, with the core of the empire in Baghdad slowly losing its grip on the periphery. One of the local dynasties that rose to power in this void was that of the Samanids. Supposedly descended from the great Sassanid hero Bahram Chobin, its first member was an 8th century Persian noble called Saman Kuda, who converted from Zoroastrianism to Islam in the 720s. After helping Caliph al-Mamun's governor in Khorasan in quelling a rebellion in 819, Kuda's 4 grandsons were each rewarded with dominion over a city in Central Asia, a region which would serve as the Samanid center of power in the future. Nur was granted the city of Samarkand, Yahya was appointed to govern Tashkent, Ilyas was stationed in Herat, and perhaps most importantly, Ahmad was sent to Fergana. All 4 of these men ruled small, feudal-like kingdoms in the region until around 892, when Ahmad's son, Ismail ibn Ahmad, conquered northern Iran, defeated the Afgharids and Saffarids, and unified the scattered Samanid princedoms into a single emirate under nominal Abbasid suzerainty. Ismail then shifted his capital to the caravan city of Bukhara. Due to the proximity of the Great Steppe, Samanid rulers inherited the ancestral duty of keeping the nomads at bay by launching military campaigns into the region and defending Islam's frontiers. In 893, Ismail launched a great expedition to the north and conquered Talas, capital of the Karluk Turks, carrying off a grand haul of loot and slaves in the process. This was supplemented by continuous smaller-scale military activity on the Samanid frontier, as their warriors would go across the border and raid the steppes. As a result of this, a steady trickle of Turkic slaves from the nomadic tribes came into the Abbasid Caliphate. However, by the late 10th century, the Samanids were already on the decline. To defend itself, armies of the Samanid realm had become increasingly reliant on Turkic slave soldiers. These former nomads had been used for civilian and court roles, such as pages and chamberlains, during most of the emirate's history. But the phenomenon of Turkic slave soldiers, known otherwise as Mamluks or Gulans, became vastly more common as Samanid history progressed. This process of increasing reliance might rightly be paralleled with the contemporary rise of mercenary use in the Byzantine Empire, or the even earlier employment of Germanic auxiliaries in imperial Roman armies. As in the case of notable Germanic generals in the Roman army, such as Ricimer and Stilicho, Turkic slave soldiers could also become incredibly prominent in the Islamic world, wielding enormous military and political power. With that said, we can introduce our main character. Abu Mansur Sebuktigin was a boy born of Turkic stock around 942. Probably in the eastern regions of modern Kyrgyzstan. The ruler of his birthplace of Barskan was supposedly a Karluk Turk, so it is possible that Sebuktigin himself also had Karluk ancestry, but this is far from certain. His enslavement as a youth was a textbook example of how such things often happened on the Central Asian steppe during, before and after this time period, probably a microcosm of how the majority of slaves were sold into the caliphate. Constant warfare and smaller scale marauding were always ongoing between different nomadic tribes over land, women and prestige, and it was in one of these raids that a young Sebuktigin was captured by the rival Bakhtian tribe and sent to a slave market in Tashkent. Whilst for sale in this Silk Road oasis town, the boy was seen by an enterprising merchant called Nusur Haji and purchased as a slave. Slavery is always a horrific practice, but in the Caliphate it did not necessarily have identical connotations of unfair backbreaking labor and non-advancement that it does to us today. Instead, Sebuktigin was taken to a school in the city of Nekshab, probably with many others like him. There, he was trained extensively and groomed to become an elite warrior. The curriculum was probably made up of military...
You would probably get slaves and then train them to fight for you. That's what I would guess. You know, to kind of replenish your troops. You could have a front line of slaves who you've trained, and I don't want this to sound cruel, but if they all died, well, they weren't really your guys. It sounds cruel, but, you know, it's the way it is.
Tactics and equestrian arts, command, combat with different types of weaponry, cavalry warfare, and many other necessary practices. After this period of intensive training, Sebuktigin, now a warrior, was transported to the city of Nishapur. There, he managed to catch the eye of a fellow Turkic slave soldier, but one who had risen to a far higher rank. This was a man named Alptigin, who subsequently purchased Sebuktigin for service in his guard. As a mere slave himself, Sebuktigin's new master was perhaps the best role model for a young Ghulam, the perfect example of what a successful slave soldier could become given time, skill, and fierce loyalty. After being captured as a child, Alptigin had risen through the ranks of Nur I's elite emir's bodyguard, consisting of Ghulam. For years of loyal service, he was then appointed to administer the city of Balkh by Nur's successor, Abd al-Malik I. This was perhaps the wealthiest Silk Road trading city at the time, which demonstrates the extraordinary trust placed in him by the emir. After his integration into Alptigin's Ghulam, Sebuktigin showcased skill, prowess, and reliability in his master's service, rising more rapidly than was usual for Turks in the personal guard of Samanid governors. We don't know, but it's possible that the governor saw something of himself in the younger man. By the age of 18, Sebuktigin was trusted to command a unit of 200 other Ghulam warriors. By 961, Alptigin had risen to the lofty status of commander-in-chief of all Samanid armies in Khorasan, undoubtedly the emirate's largest and most crucial province. This also gave him unprecedented levels of control over the Samanid government, as Abd al-Malik couldn't even make decisions without consent from the Turkic military establishment in Khorasan. However, Abd al-Malik's untimely death at the end of 961 flipped the table completely and changed the future for Sebuktigin and his powerful master. Alptigin attempted to play kingmaker, supporting the late emir's son in his attempt to inherit supreme power. However, a more influential political faction, led by a courtier named Faik, supported Abd al-Malik's brother Mansur. It quickly became clear that Alptigin wouldn't be winning this round of political maneuvering, and, fearing that his dominant position in the Samanid realm would be undermined by the potentially hostile successor, he escaped east from Nishapur with a small army of Ghulam numbering a few thousand men. On his march, Alptigin subdued an Iranian ruler in Bamiyan, and then defeated the army of a Hindu Shahi king in Kabul. He then pushed south, eventually arriving at a relatively insignificant city known as Ghazna. After a grueling 4-month siege, Alptigin took possession of the city from the Samanid vassal Lawik and set up there. If he had conquered a city in the Emirate's core, Alptigin would have been swiftly crushed, but Ghazna was a backwater settlement on the very edge of Samanid authority. However, there is evidence that a military expedition was sent against Alptigin, then soundly defeated outside Ghazna's gates, possibly led or sent by Faik. Alptigin finally passed away in 963 and was succeeded by his son, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim, who also inherited his slaves. This short rule didn't begin well, because the previously deposed Lawik came and reconquered the city briefly. Ishaq and Sebuktigin then fled to Bukhara and pledged allegiance to Mansur in return for aid. Sebuktigin supposedly impressed the Samanid court with his intelligence, judgment and piety. In 965, Ishaq returned to Ghazna with Samanid military units at his back and managed to reconquer the city, but then he died in 966. The now free Turkic warriors in Ghazna chose a chain of their Ghulam commanders to rule the city for the next 11 years, during which time Sebuktigin slowly gained more and more authority. It is said that he would win other army chiefs to his side by hosting luxurious feasts for them twice a week. In 977, Sebuktigin managed to repel another attempt by Lawik to return, and then used his victory to become governor of the city himself. Seeking to use the legacy of Alptigin to gain legitimacy and secure his position, Sebuktigin then married his former master's daughter. The young Karluk boy, who had been taken from his home on the steppe as a child, had now made a life for himself. Military expansion also began almost immediately after Sebuktigin took power in 977. A dispute between two Safarid Ghulam leaders, Tokam and Beytuz, gave him the pretext that he needed to intervene, capturing Kandahar and the surrounding regions for his new Ghaznavid empire. He undertook administrative reforms in order to tune up the old system of military fiefs, which had been introduced to Ghazna by the Turkic troops under Alptigin. The mixture of Persian bureaucrats and Indian governmental techniques that had been previously used to run the region were kept in place. Despite essentially being an autonomous ruler, detached from the central structure of Samanid power, Sebuktigin continued to present himself as a governor for the emir in Bukhara. We can see this because coins minted in the rulership of Sebuktigin bear the name of the Samanid emir more prominently than his own name. Taking this subordinate role seriously, the faithful Ghaznavid governor and his eldest son, Mahmud of Ghazna, marched to help Emir Nur II put down a rebellion in Khorasan during 993. They succeeded by August of 994, managed to execute the rebel ringleaders, and were rewarded appropriately. Sebuktigin was made the official governor of Balkh, Tokharistan, Bamiyan, Ghor and Garchistan, and was given the prestigious honorific Nazir al-Din, Defender of the Faith. Mahmud was given command of all the emir's armies in Khorasan, the richest of all Samanid provinces. Still, the Samanid
Okay.
I'll always take care of you. Hey, little bear bear.
Okay.
Still, the Samanids were now in terminal decline and began to lose vast amounts of territory, either seized outright in Transoxiana by the encroaching nomadic Karakhanids, or annexed by their Ghaznavid governors in Khorasan and south of the Oxus River. Both Emir Nur II and Sebuktigin passed away in mid-997, the latter after falling gravely ill while campaigning near Balkh at the age of 55. The inheritance of his realm was intended to be split between many of the late ruler's relatives, most prominently his son Mahmud, who was in his provincial capital at Nishapur, and Ismail, a younger son who was the son of Sebuktigin with Alptigin's daughter. This prestigious parentage led Sebuktigin to appoint Ismail as governor of Ghazna and Balkh upon his death. However, Ismail was inexperienced when compared to his elder brother, and it was clear that the arrangement could never last. In 998, Mahmud of Ghazna marched from Khorasan to Ghazna, deposed his brother, and secured personal control over all his late father's lands. The Rump Sassanid attempted to send a governor into Nishapur to take back control of Khorasan from Mahmud. The ambitious new ruler was furious at this stab in the back, and when he had finished mopping up his rivals, marched back into his appointed province and seized it for the Ghaznavid Empire. Mahmud did not respect the Samanids' symbolic authority over him as much as Sebuktigin had done, but nevertheless used the pretext of a palace coup in Bukhara to pose as an avenger of the final deposed emir and crushed his enemies. Representing the ailing dynasty in this self-interested way led to an even greater honor when in 999 Caliph al-Qadir granted Mahmud an illustrious title which he is still known by today, Yamin al-Dawla, or the right hand of the state.
I apologize for not pausing a whole lot. I don't know anything about this story, so I don't have much to add, but I gotta pause it occasionally, otherwise they get mad. But like, oh my goodness, I already forgot his name. I can't even pronounce it now. Anyways, he had a pretty good life. I mean, minus the being a slave part at the beginning, but coming up, now his children never had to go through that. They don't appreciate it. But this is an interesting story. Don't know anything about it. Back to the story though.
He was now Sultan, the Caliph's protector and representative to whom the Ghaznavids owed symbolic fealty. Sultan Mahmud's first concern was his affluent, flourishing province of Khorasan. Its fertile agriculture, extensive trade connections, and expert craft production would provide material for the campaigns Mahmud would embark upon. Naturally, Mahmud had to protect his frontier on the Oxus from the equally predatory Karakhanids. To do this, he initially entered a diplomatic marriage with the daughter of Ilig Nasser, the chief who had conquered Samanid Transoxiana. However, the decentralized tribal Karakhanid confederacy meant that little central authority existed, and the various Karakhans continued to hungrily eye Khorasan. They invaded the region twice, in 1006 and 1008. During the First War, two nomadic armies launched a pincer maneuver on Ghaznavid territories and managed to capture Nishapur and Balkh, but Mahmud managed to doggedly throw his enemy back across the Oxus. The invasion of 1008 came to an end with a final victory for Ghaznavid arms outside Balkh, which finally ended the Karakhanids' southern ambitions. During this battle, a massed charge of the Sultan's armoured Indian elephants demoralized and broke the nomadic forces. The Karakhanids subsequently entered a period of internal strife, never to threaten Khorasan again. The Ghaznavids then asserted dominion over the distant regions which had only been peripherally controlled by the Samanids, such as Sistan, Gachistan, Juzjan, Tokharistan, Kutal, and especially Khwarezm. This strategically placed oasis was another prospering nexus of trade and an agricultural paradise located on the western flank of the Karakhanid Khanate.
What's going to happen with this little independent country that's now cut off from everything? Figure you're going to attack them and take that over, right? Because they can't really go anywhere.
In order to seize it, Mahmud used a shrewd ploy. The Sultan married his sister to a brother of the reigning Khwarezmian emir, and then demanded recognition of Ghaznavid sovereignty in the Oasis realm. This deliberately provoked a violent local reaction. Mahmud's new brother-in-law was killed, giving the Sultan a pretext to intervene and annex the province. The most famous or infamous of Mahmud's military actions were the various expeditions he launched into India. Almost every single winter, the great conqueror would gather armies of regular troops at the increasingly prosperous city of Ghazna, supplemented by warriors who flocked from all corners of the Islamic world. All in all, Ghaznavid armies invaded Indian land 17 times during Mahmud's reign, carrying off loot and slaves, destroying Hindu temples and massacring populations. The climax of the campaigns was in 1025, when Mahmud led his Muslim army across the barren, inhospitable Thar Desert and then onto the Kativa Peninsula, aiming straight for the grand temple complex at Somnath. Contained within was a gilded statue of the Hindu Mahadeva, or great god, Shiva, which was served by 1,000 Brahmins, 350 entertainers, and the revenue from 10,000 villages. The Sultan plundered his way through Gujarat, hacking his way through Somnath's Hindu defenders, and the temple was seized. Precious stones and gems stored there were looted, its worshippers were slaughtered, and the structure was torched. It is said that Mahmud of Ghazna personally smashed the gilded statue of Shiva into pieces and then carried the shards back to his capital, where he incorporated the shattered fragments into the steps of Ghazna's Friday Mosque. For this, he was known forever after as Mahmud the Idol Breaker. Plunder from the raid exceeded a blistering 2 million dinars, while the number of slain supposedly exceeded 50,000. News of the Sultan's victory at Somnath spread like wildfire through the Islamic world, and to reward him, more honorific titles were sent from Baghdad by the Caliph. However, other Turkic conquerors, the Seljuks, were just around the corner, and in the next episode, we will talk about their clash with the Ghaznavids, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have...
That's interesting. I didn't know anything about that. Yeah, I've never even heard of him. I don't really have anything to add. I was just kind of... I feel like I watched it, and I didn't really react much. But I didn't have anything to say. It was interesting. Very cool. I'll probably have to watch more of this to kind of... Oh, my nose itches. See what else happens. This is a good request. Like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a good day. Have a good night.